It all began after our dad passed away a decade ago. Our entire family was devastated by the loss, especially our mom, heartbroken. She had been with him for over 40 years, and his sudden absence left her in a deep state of mourning. My siblings and I were worried about her, so we tried to keep her spirits up in any way we could. One day, while discussing the future, our mom mentioned that she wanted to renovate our family home. A modest, 2-story house surrounded by a sprawling, untamed garden on the outskirts of the city. This house had been our home for as long as we could remember, until we all moved out, leaving only our mom behind. Though it had aged, it was filled with memories of our dad, and every corner reminded her of his presence. She hoped that renovating the house might bring a sense of renewal, helping her move forward and leave some of her sorrow behind. We all thought it was a wonderful idea and wholeheartedly supported her, hoping it would help her heal. So my siblings and I agreed to contribute whatever we could to make the renovation happen. The renovation plans were modest, but we tried to maintain a tight balance between the cost and quality of materials. Our mom had a specific vision for the house, a warm, vintage style with dark-stained wood, antique furniture, and old-world charm. She even picked the paint colors herself. My siblings and I weren't particularly fond of the old antique style, but we didn't want to push our preferences. It was our mom's way of coping, and we wanted to support her. We just reminded her to be cautious about getting scammed into paying too much. Over the next 2 months, the renovation moved quickly. Our mom was constantly on the phone with updates, asking for input on curtains, fabrics, and which pieces of furniture to buy. The house was slowly transforming from its worn, aging look into a charming, rustic home with an air of history. Our mom was especially proud of one particular addition, a large, ornate wooden door she had purchased from a secondhand shop. It was an old, heavy door with intricate carvings along the frame and a thick iron latch that could only be locked from the inside. At first, I didn't think much of the door, though I did find it odd that our mom had gone out of her way to find such an old, worn piece for the house. The rest of doors were new, but this particular one seemed to hold sentimental value for her. I decided to let it go. After all, it was just a door, and if it made her happy, that was fine by me. When the renovation was finally finished, our mom invited the entire family to stay over for a few days, so we could see the house in its newly restored glory. Everyone was eager to see the transformation and to spend some time together. The visit was planned, but just days before, our mom called. She wanted to postpone our visit by 2 weeks. I thought it was odd. We had all been preparing for this, and the house was supposed to be ready. When I asked why, our mom mumbled something about the paint not being finished and a shortage of materials, though I could sense there was more to it. Nevertheless, I agreed to the delayed visit. 2 weeks later, our whole family finally gathered at the house. It was a warm evening, and the house looked stunning, just as our mother had wanted. The antique wooden furniture, soft lighting, and cozy decor gave the place a homey yet old-fashioned atmosphere. As everyone settled in, I noticed that my room, the last one down the hall, was the one with the peculiar door. It was the same old, ornate wooden door that I had seen the other day and had felt odd about at the time. Unlike the other rooms, which had modern polished wooden doors, mine was fitted with an antique one. It seemed out of place, its dark, weathered surface standing in stark contrast to the rest. The door itself felt heavy when I opened it, creaking ominously on its old hinges. The iron latch inside gave me a strange feeling, though I couldn't quite explain why. The room was small and had been designed as a multi-purpose space, not originally meant for sleeping. A sofa bed had been placed in the middle, and the wooden floors creaked slightly as I walked. Despite the odd atmosphere, I shrugged it off and went to bed, exhausted from the day. That night, however, my sleep was anything but peaceful. Around 2 a.m., I was startled awake by a faint rhythmic knocking at her door. Half asleep and disoriented, I initially thought it was one of my siblings. I grumbled, "What do you want? I'm sleeping." But there was no answer. The knocking stopped for a moment, and I closed my eyes, trying to drift back to sleep. Just as I was about to doze off, the knocking started again, this time louder and more insistent. Annoyed, I got up and shouted, "Who is it?" Still, there was no response. The room was completely silent, except for the sound of my own breathing. A wave of unease washed over me, but I tried to dismiss it. After all, it could have just been the house settling after the renovation. But soon enough, the third round of knocking came. It was louder this time, as if someone was standing just outside, urgently wanting to be let in. Frustrated and increasingly anxious, I got up and flung the door open. There was no one there. The hallway outside my room was empty, and the house was eerily quiet. A cold draft brushed past my face, and I quickly closed the door, my heart racing. When I returned to bed, the knocking didn't stop. In fact, it grew even louder, as if someone was pounding on the door with all their strength. This time, I was really terrified. I jumped out of bed, flung open the door again, and once more, there was no one there. My pulse was beating fast, and I realized I couldn't stay in this room any longer. I grabbed my pillow and blanket and spent the rest of the night on the living room couch, lights on, feeling uneasy. The next day, I didn't mention the incident, but I remained suspicious. That night, the same thing happened. The knocking came in 3 rounds. First, a soft tap, then more rapid taps, and finally, regular knocking. Once again, when I opened the door, there was no one there. Realizing something was wrong, I decided to wait for the 4th knock. When it came, I sat by the door, waiting to see what would happen next. This time, I heard something different. A dripping sound, like water falling. After a while, I opened the door, but everything seemed normal. No one was there, and there was no sign of water, no sign of anything out of the ordinary, except the growing sense of dread that gnawed at me insides. Feeling unsettled, I left the door open all night. The following morning, I shared what had happened with my family. To my surprise, my brother, who had been sleeping in the room next to mine, revealed that on the first night, he had heard me speaking to someone. When he opened his door to check, he caught a glimpse of a woman in traditional clothing, quickly passing by my room before disappearing. He described her as a middle-aged woman. The sight had shocked him, but he hadn't said anything at the time, assuming it was just his imagination. Now, after hearing my story, he wasn't so sure. All of us looked at each other, and eventually, our mom confessed that she had been experiencing strange occurrences even before we had arrived. She had originally installed the antique door in her own bedroom, but after several nights of hearing knocking, seeing strange shadows, and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, she had it moved to the multi-purpose room where I've been sleeping, hoping the strange happenings would stop. She hadn't mentioned it to me and my siblings, thinking no one would notice or be affected. But clearly, something was wrong with the door. All of us urged our mom to return the door to the shop, and she agreed. That very afternoon, we took the door down and returned it to the secondhand shop where she had bought it from. However, as soon as we arrived at the shop, the shopkeeper's son took one look at the door, immediately grew pale, and began to apologize profusely. When the shop owner, an elderly woman, saw us returning the door, her son's expression changed further. She rushed out and scolded him for ever selling it. The shopkeeper also apologized and explained that the door wasn't supposed to be sold. It was meant to be taken to a temple to be cleansed because of its tragic history. After speaking with the shop owner, we learned that the door came from a house where a mother and daughter once lived. The daughter was a teenager who often snuck out at night by climbing through the window. One night, while she was out, a thief broke into the house. Her mother, hearing the noise, knocked on the daughter's door, trying to warn her and wake her up, not realizing she wasn't inside. She kept knocking desperately until the thief found her and stabbed her to death by the door. After the incident, the father sold the door to the shop owner, believing the mother's spirit was still lingering around it, still knocking, unable to move on due to her concern for her daughter. We all, shaken to the core, returned home without the door, and from that day on, the strange occurrences stopped. Though I would never forget the nights I spent hearing those ghostly knocks.